And committee members. Since I was vice chair of the House Committee on Juvenile Justice and Family Issues in 2021, working on this legislation has been one of my top priorities, and the reason why starts with a story. In December 2021, a report by National Review came out about the state of the Corrections Center for Women. The explosive report was from a female whistleblower who was repeatedly raped and beaten by a biological male inmate over the course of multiple years. In one instance, the female inmate awoke to find Jonathan, a male biological inmate who identified as female, over her bed with an erection, touching her all over. This behavior had occurred for multiple weeks as Jonathan primed the female inmate for rape. He would grab her hair, overtly flirt with her, and make repeated sexual advances toward her. The inmate made multiple attempts to report the behavior. Unfortunately, the correctional officers often ignored the woman's claims to avoid discrimination litigation. As a result, the woman was the victim of horrendous sexual assault. And while the facility did eventually separate Jonathan from the general population, no punishments were ever levied. Jonathan was never subject to any punishment for these heinous acts, but the woman he assaulted will deal with the fear and trauma from those events for the rest of her life. The report also tells the story of another woman, Heather Trent. Ms. Trent was an inmate in the Washington Corrections Center. Scott Fleming, a former corrections officer at the Correctional Center, took Ms. Trent under his wing. Ms. Trent was mentally challenged and was often described as having the disposition of a little girl. Despite Officer Fleming's protection, Ms. Trent was raped by Hobby Bingham, a biological male inmate in the women's prison. Of course, across the sea, there is the infamous story of Isla Bryson, a biological male in Scotland convicted of multiple rapes on multiple women, all while identifying as a male. However, before his sentencing, Bryson conveniently switched his gender identity to female and was assigned to a women-only prison. It took a national controversy to ensure that this convicted violent sex offender was not assigned to a women-only facility. In the Texas juvenile correctional system right now, there are 726 youth currently in state secure facilities, 65 of whom are girls. Members, we cannot let what happened in Washington, Scotland, and other places happen here. The time is now for Texas to take a concrete step to protect our young, vulnerable girls at all levels of the system. House Bill 437, the Juvenile Girls Protection Act, codifies necessary protections for young female inmates into law by prohibiting the Texas Juvenile Justice Department from housing juvenile detainees in cell blocks, dormitories, showers, or other sensitive areas with members of the opposite biological sex. Finally, the legislation also ensures that the state of Texas remains compliant with existing federal law and rulemaking under the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003. The legislation does not prohibit TJJD from assessing the unique health and safety needs of each inmate and making individualized decisions as necessary. Members, the state of Texas has the legal and moral standing to take action to protect our young girl detainees. Women Prisoners versus District of Columbia in 1996 affirmed that the separation of inmates based on biological sex is unquestionably constitutional, so long as it serves a governmental interest. Protecting vulnerable young girls from rape and abuse undoubtedly is a governmental interest. Pitts versus Thornburg in 1989 affirmed that the government could not act in a manner that evinces the belief that women are second-class citizens or unworthy of the consideration provided to male offenders. Subjecting these scared, vulnerable young girls to possible rape and abuse just to affirm the gender identity of a biological male is undeniably treating our girls as second-class citizens. Can you imagine a young girl locked up with biological males with no way to protect herself? What a nightmare. Lastly, multiple court cases have repeatedly recognized that a correctional system has the right to ensure that women and young girls are protected from sexual abuse and physical violence, as well as have equal access to all inmate rights, correctional programs, and opportunities for rehabilitation. The Juvenile Girls Protection Act codifies the right unquestionably into Texas law. Members, if one rape happens in prison, it is one too many. If one biological male beats a young girl in prison, it is one too many. This abuse is happening in other states, and we cannot let it happen here. On behalf of the young girls in our youth facilities, I urge the committee to pass this common sense legislation. These girls have made mistakes and are paying the price for their mistakes. The price should not include risk of rape and sexual assault by biological males. Thank you, Chair Cook and members. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and I respectfully request the right to close.
All right, member, any questions for Representative Swanson? Representative Riddell.
Just a quick question. So I guess based on the assumption of this, that means that males are currently allowed to be in female juvenile detention centers. I mean, I would think that's obvious, but that's what basically is the case right now.
At this point, we are very fortunate that our systems are following what this bill would already do, but we need to codify that now. We cannot trust that in the future we might have new leadership there and the rules might get changed.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
It would also strengthen us too if in future ever the federal system tried to force us to do something else, then we're in a better situation if we have a law that the federal regulations are going up against.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that.
Chair recognizes Vice Chair Wu.
Thank you. Hi, Ms. Swanson. Representative Swanson, let me ask you a few questions. Now, this version of your bill talks about a juvenile's sex assigned at birth, right?
Their sex assigned as birth, and it uses the same criteria we've been using in previous years on Save Girls Sports and Save Women's Sports. Mm-hmm. We're using the birth certificate issued at or near the time of birth.
And is there anything else that would make that determination? Like, would your bill consider anything else?
That's what the bill is using for that. And they do have they do have those birth certificates, and I'm certain that they could check with the state to make sure they hadn't been changed, but that's what it's using.
You understand that not every person has a birth certificate, right?
Yes, but pretty much everyone does. I'm going to leave that for the questioning because I would doubt that they have anyone without a birth certificate, and I would urge you to ask them what they would do if they had such a situation.
Because of economics, because of inavailability of hospitals, because the nearest hospital is 150 miles away, many Texans are born through midwives, give home births. Those don't necessarily get a birth certificate. That's not an insignificant part of the population.
I would urge you to ask them what they would do in that situation, and I have great faith that they can figure it out.
Well, no, I appreciate that, and we're happy to work on this bill. And I think, in fact, your bill actually says that if the official birth certificate is not available, then another government record that states the child's biological sex would be okay, right?
Right.
So no matter what their birth certificate, whether they have it or not, if they can't find it or it can't be located, like their school records, if the school says that they're female, they're female. The school says they're male, they're male.
I'm going to leave that to you to ask the TJJD to go ahead and ask them how they would like to handle that. I don't see it as being a problem, but ask them if they're running into that.
I'm sorry. I'm asking this very inartfully. What I mean is, you, as the author of this bill, do you intend that if a child has a record, a different time of government record that says what their gender is, what their sex is, that is sufficient? It's in your bill, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Was that your intent?
That is my intent, but I do feel like if it was found to be falsified, if the department felt like it was false, then they can design rules to be able to handle that situation.
And I apologize, I think maybe I'm still not maybe explaining this correctly, but what I'm saying is, well, I mean, the bill doesn't have a provision for that. It just simply says that the sex determined by their birth certificate. If the birth certificate is not available, unattainable, another government record that states the child's biological sex, if that is a school vaccination record that the school issues that says this is a girl, this is a boy, that is sufficient.
Again, I'd just repeat the last answer I gave you.
That would be interpreted by TJJD, is what that's the answer she gave.
Okay. I'm not sure if they could interpret this because it's set in black and white. It just says it's this or this.
We will get
It's okay.
interpretation
I'm sorry.
on that. And
I'll move on. I'll move on.
okay, is it your intent that you would like biological males in with vulnerable young females? Is that your
This
intent?
is not my bill. I don't have any intent on this. This is not my bill. This is your bill, right?
It is, but I'm trying to understand why
So,
the direction of your questioning.
okay. Well, let me. I apologize. Let me get there a little faster. So, do you know what intersex people are?
Vice Chair Wu, I think you sat through plenty of my layouts on the sports bill, so certainly I've
I have
done
not.
a lot of research on. You certainly heard me lay them out on the floor in 21 and 23, and yes, I am quite well aware of all that.
So you understand that the biological sex that is placed on a birth certificate for somebody who is intersex may not exactly match their complete physical form.
Of course, and that is why in every one of these bills it says issued at or near the time of birth, because these days in Texas we are much more sophisticated, and if a child is intersex, we can now do DNA and other tests and figure out which one of those, if they're XXY
Yeah.
or they're XYY, they can now figure that out, and they know which one of those sexual reproductive systems will end up taking over, because both of their systems cannot, they cannot mature, both of them. One will mature and one will do the other. So long ago, we had little boys who were intersex like this, but because we didn't have a way to test for this, and they had very, what shall I say, their genitals were somewhat ambiguous, then it was easier to make that child look like a little girl. And then when, they would be raised as a girl, and they did not, no one ever told them that they were intersex like this. But again, because of these very, very rare situations where you have XXY or you have XYY, and because fortunately we're made where only one of those reproductive systems will end up taking over and maturing, then you had a boy who had unfortunately been treated as a girl. And we don't do that anymore because now we have very sophisticated systems, and they would wait to put out that birth certificate until they had run these, and then they could decide which one of these would be the biologically dominant system.
If they're born at a hospital, right?
Yes, or if they got anywhere, I would think a parent like that would go, would go and seek help for their child.
Because according to American Medical Research, roughly about 1% of the population is or has traits of intersex. Like 1% of the population.
I don't understand why are we spending so much time worrying about 1% of the population instead of protecting these girls who have a right to be protected. That's who I want to watch out for instead of these like imaginary situations that are not coming up. What are the chances that someone was born and never went to a hospital, they never got tested, they never got a birth certificate, and they end up in a juvenile detention center? I think that that is like next to impossible, and I don't like, I resent this being used to stop the protection of our vulnerable girls that are put in these situations. It is so important to protect them.
Ms. Swanson, I don't want to belabor this point, but you understand that 1% of the 333 million Americans is 3.3 million people.
So I'm asking you again, do you care about the girls in our juvenile facilities?
Absolutely. And that's why we're so concerned about the part of this bill that says that it eliminates the protections of the United States Rape Elimination Act.
It actually does not go against that, and it follows it, and it also follows the current federal guidelines that have come out, and I certainly feel that the biological sex at or near the time of birth, if they take a little longer to get it, like it's not defined what is at or near, but the intention is to stop a biological male from, or it could go the other way around, from getting a birth certificate changed many years later and then ending up risking the safety and protection of our girls in these facilities.
So you can understand that sometimes, especially with intersex people, that the biological sex assigned at birth could be incorrect.
Very rarely these days. We have technology these days. We're not back in the old times.
Yeah, we thought people were moving forward.
Well, that's what we've done with technology. So we're really not having this, and I feel like it's a red flag trying to draw attention away from my intent and the intent of Texas in general to protect our girls who are vulnerable, locked up in these situations. They should not have to worry about a biological male.
Do you understand that the United States Prison Rape Elimination Act was established in 2003 specifically to end sexual assault in detention facilities and prisons?
I absolutely do, and I have concern for everyone, no matter what they did, adult prison, whatever. No one deserves to be raped, attacked, beaten in prison or in juvenile facilities, and I've been very happy to find out exactly how our systems run, and I'll let you question them when they come up. And we just need to codify this.
So one of the problems in codifying this is that the United States Prison Rape Elimination Act specifically says you cannot label LGBTQ people as specifically as more dangerous than any other group.
And this bill does not do that in any form or fashion. And again, I would refer that to the witnesses coming up.
And also that the United States Prison Rape Elimination Act specifically goes into the idea that sometimes trans kids or trans people are actually the most likely to be abused.
Again, that is being handled quite well, and we are following those federal guidelines, and I would urge you to ask these questions when our witnesses come up. And but under no circumstances whatsoever should the, whatever you want to call it, the gender confusion or the of an individual or intersex issues, that should never be allowed to threaten the safety of our girls in these situations.
But Rep. Swanson, that's the exact thing. Like you, right here in front of us, you can barely tell us who exactly is affected by this, which group of people specifically would be affected by this one by one. And you're not able to
Because
find
we are already taking care of that in our system. And as soon as I sit down, you'll be able to ask those questions, and I think you will be very pleased at how this is being handled.
And that is the very problem of how they will interpret and enforce this, because right now, the United States Prison Rape Elimination Act specifically has protections for children. And what this bill does, the way I read your bill as an attorney who practices juvenile law, you would take what is in PREA, what in the United States Prison Rape Elimination Act, and flip it around. You would flip around the
Absolutely not.
protections for.
No, absolutely not. And that, again, is a red flag. And that is like, it's just a false claim. That's not happening. And we have pods. They don't mix people with pods. I'm saying, yes, you can protect different groups by having different pods, and they're not mixed, but they must be in the facility with their own biological sex. And all those issues do not make an excuse to endanger our young girls.
You seem very familiar with the inner workings of Juvenile Detention Center. So, yeah, people are broken out into pods. People are broken out into different groups, right? And many times those groups are based on gang affiliation, risk levels, mental health, types of medication or medical issues they might have, correct?
Absolutely. And so we can certainly do that here. And again, I would urge you to protect our young girls, and they deserve it. Do you want a biological male locked up with these young girls?
And
do you want them being attacked and raped?
And the problem is that when you have already these segregated groups, and you're saying for each of these groups that you're going to segregate because of gang affiliation, because you're run with this clique, because you don't get along with those people, because you have this mental health issue, because you have this medical issue, or whatever it is, they would now have to create each new one and prepare a new space for every single one of these groups that now has to be resegregated by another factor.
Again, this is a false flag, and it is totally to detract from the need of the bill. The bill wants to protect girls. The girls deserve to be protected and not have to be worried about being raped or beaten in our juvenile facility.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about girls being raped in TJJD, okay, and boys. Have you read the United States Department of Justice report on the Texas Juvenile Justice Department in the last year?
I have not read that. It does not affect whether I
Please
want to
confine your
protect our
questions
girls.
to the bill, when not in.
Absolutely. And you understand that that report made no mention of any issues with trans residents or kids.
Why would we want to endanger our girls? Just for some report, or just let's protect them now so that we don't wait for people, for girls to be raped, beaten. They shouldn't have to live in fear in our facilities, and we're a big enough state that we can accommodate for that, and our girls should not have to suffer. Women and girls are not second-class citizens.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Do you know who is beating and raping the girls in TJJD?
I don't know that that has to do with this bill, but you're welcome to tell me.
It's the adults.
Okay, thank you.
This bill doesn't address those, does it?
I believe that you have spent quite a bit of time studying the bill, and so the bill says what it says.
It does not.
Right, because that can be taken care of already, and we need to protect our girls. We need to codify what's already being done, and it would put us in line with the current administration's executive orders.
So, I mean, we have already, I mean, you brought up like we need to protect what's already been done. I mean, we already have a bill, we already have a law that says you're not supposed to rape kids. But the adults in TJJD are still doing it. Why doesn't your bill address that?
We're not going to talk about what the
Why not?
Because we're going to confine the remarks to the bill, House Bill
Well,
437.
maybe we should add that into the bill.
Well, if you want to offer an amendment, you're welcome
Well,
to
we
do
have to
that.
talk about it for me to offer it.
Your remarks will be confined to House Bill 437
Thank you.
in order to be recognized. He has the floor. We yield the floor to Representative Verdell
In a moment.
in a moment.
Are you aware of any report, incident, where a trans child assaulted another child sexually?
Oh, absolutely, in our schools, absolutely. There are plenty of reports of that.
In our-
And fortunately, we are not doing that so far in our juvenile facilities,
Yeah.
and I want to codify that. And I want to brag on our current administrators there that they are following common sense, safety, and they are protecting our girls and our women.
Because they're following the United States Prison Rape Elimination Act.
We need to codify the protection of our girls in our system.
Yes, that is the United States Prison Rape Elimination Act. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Verdell, if you don't mind, Vice Chair Jones has to leave here shortly. Yeah, so Vice Chair Jones.